Good evening. Well, you remember that when we started this season, I said that I had planned a longer trip here this time, hoping that we would do more work than we had done in previous years, and you see it's working out that way. This may be partly because I would like it so, but to a far greater extent, it must be because you wish it so. This is in accord with our spiritual principles, that what we desire, what we seek, what we want with all our heart and soul, we draw to us. To a certain extent, that's true on the human plane. I believe there is some kind of a saying to the effect that whatever it is that a person keeps their mind fastened on, that eventually they tend to become. But in the spiritual world, that is an absolute principle. In the spiritual world, it is literally true that desire is prayer. Of course, that doesn't mean desire for a home or desire for health or desire for an automobile. It means desire for God, desire for truth, desire for spiritual realization, desire that the hunger of the heart be satisfied. Spiritual desire is really a deep form of prayer, to hunger and thirst after God, as the hart panteth after the water brook. And so it is that in our work, and not only in our work, this is true of all spiritual work, spiritual teachers are attuned to certain pitches or vibrations. And they don't respond to anything but these particular tones. You might hold up wealth to a spiritual teacher, but you won't find them flick an eyelash in that direction. They just don't respond to it. You may hold up fame, and you'll find they don't even know that you're passing by. You may hold up an awful lot of the things of this world to a spiritual teacher, and they won't even know you're around. But the very moment that a spiritual stirring takes place within you, a stirring to know God, whom to know aright is life eternal, a stirring to know truth, reality, any name that you wish to give it, the very moment that that stirs in you, it sets up a spiritual vibration. And when it does, it finds a response in a teacher somewhere on the globe. You may not know the identity of the teacher or the location of the teacher, but in due time a set of circumstances shape themselves, and you find yourself in the presence of that teacher in whom you have set up this vibration, or with whom you have actually tuned in. Now, the teacher responds. They respond in the same way that a parent responds to the love of the child. Let the child reach out with a tiny bit of love, and the parent responds with a great big armful of love. And so it is, let the student reach out with some tiny measure of spiritual longing, and they will find a teacher pouring out the fullness of their own capacity of spiritual love and of spiritual truth. You can no more fool the spiritual teacher than you can fool God. There is no use praying to God with promises of devotion and so forth and so on if it isn't a full and complete free offering of oneself, because there is no way to fool the divine principle of this life. It is all knowing, all seeing, all discerning. And in the same way, spiritual teachers aren't fooled by people for very long. Sometimes, for a short time, someone seems to get away with giving the appearance of wanting God, but it doesn't take long for discernment to see right through. And on the other hand, the teacher can often discern in the student qualities that the student doesn't know that they themselves possess, longings that have not yet come fully to light, and a depth of receptivity that they are not yet aware of in themselves. This all comes to the teacher just as it will ultimately come to the student, by the power of that developing consciousness, the enriching of consciousness with qualities that are beyond the human. It's a strange thing sometimes to see it work. Not that you can ever explain it, because you can't understand it. Or perhaps at least here is one who may truthfully say that he doesn't understand it, even while witnessing it. For instance, today, a list of names was misplaced. That is, to us it seemed that it was misplaced. I couldn't recall where it was, nor could Emma, and we started searching for it and couldn't find it. And then I just stood still for a minute. My thought went to that list, and as quick as a flash I picked up a book off the desk and opened it, and there in the back of the book was that list. You can call it by any name you like. You can explain it in any way that you like. But the fact remains that while we were humanly looking for it, we didn't find it. And when we stopped for a second, to whatever it is that is all-knowing, it led us right to the place where it was. Now, it is in that same way that we as students are led to teachers or to teachings. We are led to the very book. Often we are led to the very page on which is the passage that we must have, and without any human knowledge of what it is we're seeking or where it is. This might be called an intuitive faculty, spiritual faculty. It's unimportant what you name it. The important thing is how does one attain it? And the only answer I know to that is to be sure within oneself that one really and truly is seeking God awareness. Now, no one who is seeking God awareness is ever going to be disappointed. Where disappointment comes in, frustration, you will usually find that seeking God is for a purpose. Now, you can't seek God for a purpose. God must be the only purpose. It's all right for the metaphysician in the early stages of their work to believe that you're going to go to God and find health, or you're going to reach God and find supply, or that through God you're going to find peace or safety or security. That's all right. We call that the baby stage, the infant stage. Probably every one of us came to this way through just that stage. I'm sure of this, that most do. But ultimately, it becomes clear, more especially if you are fortunate enough to succeed in making the demonstration of health or supply or some kind of a peace, the realization eventually dawns, well, now I did that, but I still don't feel that I got what I'm looking for. Now what's lacking? Now what's wrong? Now I got the health I was seeking, I got the supply, I got the marriage, or I got the home. Now what? There's something still missing, and usually it is then that the realization comes, aha, that isn't what I was seeking. I thought I was seeking it, now I've got it, and I'm not too stirred up about it. It's something else. And the day comes when you realize, I never will be satisfied with all the health there is in the world or all the wealth there is in the world if I do not have that other thing called God. If I do not attain that realization, that feeling of the presence, that awareness, that comes to many, many people. And then they realize that for some, the attempt to find God for a purpose resulted in failure because it was inevitable. For others, it resulted in a success, but only that it may lead them to the realization of the great truth that after you've got what you want, it isn't what you wanted. There is something beyond. Now, the search for God is interesting because in the search, you not only find God, but you find so many people of God consciousness. And you find yourself meeting people, not necessarily on your own path, but with the same goal. Paths may differ, and at least it's been my experience that in meeting these people, you don't even have an awareness of the fact that your path isn't the same, your way isn't the same. You are so thrilled with the idea of being with someone whose goal is the same. I have been with one person who seems to live their life in the delight of ceremonies. And ordinarily, I'm not attracted to that type of person. In fact, there is something in me that shies away from them. But in this particular case, that wasn't true. And I couldn't understand it until on better acquaintance I learned that it was only through those ceremonies that this person was able to reach behind them to the actual contact with the source. And then I understood. The entire situation took on a different light. So it is that I'm thinking of the Master's statement when the disciples complained about this man down the street who was healing. But of course he wasn't doing it in the name of Jesus Christ. And I think the disciples must have looked on him as a competitor and probably thought it would be a good idea if they could run him off the street. But the Master said that those that are not against us are for us. In other words, anywhere, anytime that anyone is seeking God realization or attaining God realization, we are one with them, whether they have attained it or are trying to attain it through the Orthodox Church or through paganism or through metaphysics or any other way that leads up. Truly, the Vedantist has said that there are many paths but only one mountaintop. Many ways but one God. Now, it is for this reason that when your heart is dedicated to the attainment of God, or God realization, that you may find yourself in the company of very strange people, religiously speaking, and wonder what brought you into contact with them. But if you just perceive, if you just open your inner eye, you will discern that the reason is that you have this in common. They are not against you. They are going your very way, only reading a different book or sitting in a different position or standing. Sometimes they take their shoes off before going into temple. Sometimes they take their hats off. Sometimes they put their shoes on, and sometimes they put their hats on. It really makes no difference. That which counts is the degree in which God is the goal. Now, the degree in which each student purifies themselves and makes God their true goal, and really purifies themselves of all belief that in attaining God they are thereby going to attain some other goal, in the degree that they can overcome such tendencies in order to be spiritually pure within, in that degree will they find the teacher who can lead them to that particular demonstration. It would seem in these ages that there is a teacher for those that seek. And the only way of attaining that teacher is by attaining the same measure of inner purity, if you wanted, integrity, because you have to set up in you the vibration that rings, finds answer in the teacher. And of course, your rate of vibration will draw to you the quality of teacher for which you are vibrating at. Do you know what I mean? So it is. I saw this trip before we came here, that there should be more work, and so more time was left. More time was arranged without anything specific in mind. Because of that very thing, you see, that leaving myself clear, there had to be an answering, a drawing force within you. Otherwise, if I set up shop every day to speak, it would just be like a cloud without rain or tinkling cymbals. It would not set up a response in the students. Let us always remember this. We are drawing to us out of this world our own. Our own shall come to us. But in some ways that's a horrible thought, because it means whatever the quality of our own, that's what we're drawing. And it's very necessary to watch that inner integrity. That is why I caution students to watch themselves very carefully and closely, not so much in the beginning of their studies, but when they are beginning to feel that they're getting somewhere. When they begin to feel that, well, now I'm getting somewhere, now I commence to understand, now I'm commencing to see fruitage, now things are becoming clearer, now I'm probably on cloud 2 or 3. Because there is where the danger comes in. Until one is seasoned in the Spirit, there are temptations on the spiritual path, and this is symbolized in Scripture by the Master's 3 temptations in the wilderness. If you study that carefully, you must be quite surprised that one who is already a master, one who is already spiritually ordained, should be called upon to go through 3 temptations of the nature of those that he went through in the wilderness. You wouldn't have thought that he was susceptible to wanting power, wanting fame, wanting to use thought in order to turn stones into bread. You would have thought that at that stage he was already perfected. But that couldn't have been, because the perfected soul could not possibly be tempted. I was on a ship and asleep at night, and I was awakened and had to get out of bed and write. And I wrote a letter, which is in circulation among our students in the States, although it goes back a few years. A letter that warned of the temptations to which the students are subject on this path. One is the temptation of lack. There are so many students who, just about the time when they think that they are spiritually progressed, may find themselves going through their deepest trials of lack. And the temptation is to believe that God has deserted them, or that they have become unworthy of God. And if that condition of lack lasts a little bit too long, they get discouraged and give up. And it is probably better so, because had they continued on, they would have found more troubles ahead. Because unless a person is rooted and grounded in the Spirit, there will someday come some problem that they will not be able to surmount, as Judas Iscariot found a temptation beyond his capacity to resist. It would have been better for Judas Iscariot had he dropped out of the Master's band in the first year. Far better for him. To others, the early flush of realization of the Spirit brings prosperity. And they find that prosperity is something they couldn't take, because it becomes something in and of itself, or the things that it can do for one, or buy for one, or give to one. And so thought is deflected from the fact that the form of wealth isn't wealth, but the source. So it is. At every step there are temptations. Peter had his temptation to preserve his own life. You see, self-preservation is the first law of human nature, not spiritual nature. Oh no. When one has attained spiritual nature, they are not concerned about their human sense of life, their human sense of supply, their human sense of freedom. Some were cast into lions' dens, and some were burned, and some were crucified, some were cast into prison. That makes no difference to the illumined, for that which constitutes illumination is the realization of immortality. And one cares but little whether immortality is lived this side or that side. Peter was going to preserve his safety. And thereby he lost much. The fact that the Master forgave him was demonstration for the Master, but not for him. He still had his own demonstration to make. And you may be assured of this, that regardless of how little Scripture tells us about it, he must have gone through a very bad siege in the realization of the fact that such a thing could have happened to him after 3 years with the Master. So let no one overestimate the degree of their spiritual progress unless they have been tested. And when they are tested, let them not fear for the consequences, for there are no consequences, except the joyous consequence of overcoming fear, overcoming this idea of self-preservation, overcoming whatever it is in human nature that keeps one from the full and complete realization of their spiritual identity. One memory, if carried with us, will suffice to carry us through every temptation or any temptation of any nature. One realization will carry us through, and that is the realization that our goal is God realization, and that we have no intention of stopping until that is attained, be the price whatever it may be the effort, the devotion, whatever it may be. God realization is the goal. And then, should lack come into our experience, we will realize that this can never separate us from our goal, that it never can deflect us from our goal, that it never can be a power in our experience. We have set our feet on this path and we will not look back. And if we have to go forward with lack or limitation for a companion for a while, perhaps it will teach us some good lessons. If prosperity comes to us, we will be doubly watchful. It's so much easier to be virtuous when poor. We will be doubly virtuous because we will realize that wealth does have a temptation to interfere with our search for God. It provides opportunities for distracting our attention for what the world calls the peace that the world can give, the joys that the world can give, the pleasures that the world can give. And this can set up temptations far greater than lack can do. And so the greater the prosperity, the greater must be the constant realization, God is my goal, and this thing will not move me or take me from my path, or take from me the golden hours or minutes that I need for meditation, for reading, for study, for the companionship of those who are on this path. Many who have entered spiritual work have been spoiled by their success, by the numbers who come to them, because numbers do not count in this spiritual work. Whether there are a dozen of you sitting out here, or whether there are 1,000 or 2,000, it makes no difference to the person in this seat. The person in this seat is sitting in conscious union with God, trying to be an instrument through which God expresses. And it makes no difference whether there's two people to receive it, one person to receive it, or 10,000, because the numbers are of no importance. I believe it is true that the deeper the realization, the greater the numbers that will come. But numbers must never be an object. Never. Because again, when the thought is on effect, it is not on cause. What I'm trying to say to you is this, that your consciousness determines your demonstration. No demonstration rise higher than the consciousness from which it emanates. Therefore, in proportion as your consciousness maintains its integrity and keeps as its goal God realization, God demonstration, God vision, God being, in that proportion do you draw that very experience unto yourself. Just as we learn in life never to blame anyone for our misfortunes, regardless of how much humanly someone may seem to be at fault, so do we learn that we can draw unto ourselves only that which is already established in our consciousness. The bread that you cast on the waters is the bread that will return to you. And if the bread that you are casting on the waters is God hunger, God desire, the bread of life is that which will come back to you. Yes, we are responsible ourselves as to what degree of good we get from a teacher, from a teaching, even from a book. What degree of spiritual integrity do we bring to these? That is the degree that we will draw out from them. A book by itself is just white pages and black ink. And of course that's all you can get off of a page, unless you bring something else to that page. When you bring to that page your God hunger, you draw from it God satisfaction, the bread of life, the meat and the wine. When you bring to a classroom, when you bring to a teacher your heart filled only with spiritual desire, you draw through the teacher the bread of life, the wine, the water, the staff, the substance. That is your demonstration. In our work, there are certain things that you have to remember every single day of your life, and I at least have not grown to a stage when I can forget it for a single day, forget these things that I'm about to tell you. And so I believe that for a long, long time to come, you will not outgrow the need to remember consciously every day, with every circumstance that confronts you, these basic principles of the infinite way. First of all, that you have to review often in your mind what you know of the nature of God. what kind of a God it is that you're worshiping, so that you do not come under the world's mesmerism and start going to God for things, or expecting God to do something an hour from now that God hasn't been doing the past million years. In other words, that you do not revert unconsciously or subconsciously to expecting God to do something for you or for someone else. You have to be alert always to remember that regardless of what it is you have in mind, God is. God is already the shepherd. God already is leading into by the still waters and into green pastures. Is. You have to remember that God is. That's the continuous song. God is. Don't expect anything of God. God is doing it, being it. God is. Don't think by your prayers or treatments to inaugurate any activity of God, to start God into operation, nor believe that you can channel God over to a person here, there, or the other place. God cannot be channeled. God is omnipresence. And God must be realized as omnipresence. In every class, you'll notice that the question is put on the desk, how does a treatment reach the one that it's meant for? Well, it doesn't. And it can't. God is omnipresence. If a treatment is intelligent, it must be the realization of omnipresence. The minute you would try to channel it to someone, you must have first accepted an absence, a separation, a lack. Well, then it's the blind leading the blind. One of spiritual understanding knows that God is, and that God is omnipresence, and that God is love, and that God has knowledge that you have need of these things, and it is God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And that kind of a treatment doesn't ask anything of God, and it doesn't send God anywhere to do anything. It doesn't channel truth in a direction. It realizes omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience, all wisdom, all knowing, all love. But if we do not consciously remember this day by day, we lapse back into the old belief of believing that we are going to inaugurate God or some action of God, or that we're going to send it over to West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, or perhaps out to Croydon. No. Spiritual wisdom is an understanding of omnipresence. And omnipresence doesn't send a truth to anybody, anywhere, at any time. It abides in the realization of the omnipresence of truth. Now, the other point is power. The infinite way is almost exclusive in its stand on God as the only power. Not that all religions don't teach it, but they do not accept it. They accept power in disease. They accept power in sin. They accept power in form. But practice in the infinite way is absolutely dependent on the degree of your realization of God as the only power, so that you learn not to hate, fear, or love that which has form. Do you see that? You do not hate, fear, or love that which has form. Once in a while you'll hear a question in a class, but can't we love each other? Yes, but we love each other, not form. We don't love form. The mother doesn't even love the form of her child. She loves the child. We love each other, but we don't love form. We love each other, but we recognize that we are not form in the physical sense. We are spiritual consciousness, and if we have a form, it's entirely spiritual, incorporeal. And that love is above human affection. So it is when we are thinking of power. Is there a law? Is there power in a law of infection or contagion or heredity? Is there power in a law of weather or climate or food? And of course, in proportion, always in proportion, to your realization that there is not power in form, any form, in that degree will your treatments be successful. Now, there are many other things which constitute the letter of truth in the infinite way. Those, of course, you already know, and in these months to come, I think there's enough provision for the next year of new classes. You will see this letter and hear this letter of truth repeated over and over and over again. Why? Because you must consciously keep these things in thought, or you revert back to the world's mesmerism. Now, having said this much, I want to add this, that when it comes to the actual healing work, it isn't this knowledge that does the healing. This knowledge only sets you free from fear, so that you can sit back quietly and take the next step. And that is listening, getting still inside. You can't do that, remember, while there is fear. If you have fear for your patient, if you have fear of their condition, fear of their pain, don't believe that you can sit back and bring out the harmony. It will not work. Today, while we were sitting in the flat, a telephone call came for help. And I sat back to give it. But I found myself inwardly with a sense of confusion. I could not find that center that is so necessary for me to find if harmony is to appear. And so I asked Emma to sit down with me and meditate with me, so that this, between us, or with two of us that gather together, this peace would come, and it did. It came so beautifully and so wonderfully that both of us were sent right back into the bosom of the Father. It was a most beautiful experience. But you see, that couldn't be as long as there was fear. Now, of course, you know I don't consciously fear, but then fear isn't personal. Fear is never of you or of me. You will learn that in the July letter. Fear is never of you or me. It's an impersonal thing. It's a universal thing. And so when I sit down, if there is a disturbance there, that must first be overcome before I can reach that center through which the healing influence comes.
Now, to attain that ability to reach the center, you won't always have someone there capable of giving you that cooperation. You have to make use of the letter of truth. You sit there and, if you like to call it that, argue with yourself, converse with yourself, reason with yourself on those points. Is there more than one power? Is there more than one law? Is there any effect in a law of disease or a law of sin or a law of fear? Until you do come to that place where you no longer fear or no longer are inwardly disturbed, can be completely at peace, and then when the Spirit of the Lord God is upon you, that's when the healing takes place. But first bring yourself to a state where you no longer hate, fear, or love the particular error that is confronting you, so that you can be receptive and receive that still small voice or the feeling of the presence. It is in that second stage where the healing work takes place. But that second stage only comes when you have met the circumstances of the first. Now, it may not be that you will always have to go through that first step. We had just the opposite experience a few days ago when Mrs. Anthony and my wife and I were sitting in the same room, and the telephone bell rang, and it was a call from California asking emergency help needed for a patient in the hospital. And at that time, there wasn't a single need for anything to be done or anything to be thought. The response was so instantaneous within me that I don't think any mention was even made of what the nature of the telephone call was. But today I received a letter that the patient is out of the hospital and at home. Now you see what I mean? The healing work is not done through knowing the letter of truth, but when the Spirit is upon you. But you cannot get the Spirit upon you if there is in you any feeling of reaction to the error that confronts you. So that you must know the correct letter of the message of the infinite way. It is important. You must know these tapes that are embody the principles of healing work. You have a whole class on that in the Adelaide, Australia tapes. An entire class just given to one subject. And in every class you'll find at least one tape. For this reason, that I cannot forget that we are not sufficiently advanced to stand on absolute truth. There's nothing wrong with absolute truth as absolute truth, because absolute truth is truth. But there is something wrong with trying to demonstrate it if you believe for a moment that you have arrived at a place when you no longer need the letter of truth. No, there isn't anyone, at least I have never met anyone in this work who is successfully healing, who has gotten to a place where they must not at some time or other bring this conscious knowledge of the letter of truth to bear within themselves. Yes, when you are active in the practice and having 30, 40, or 50 telephone calls a day, you may only need 2 or 3 periods for that inner reminder. For the rest, you're already in the Spirit, and the work is being done without it. But you'll still find that there's a need for going within 2, 3, 4 times a day and reminding yourself of these basic truths. So first of all, remember that we must never lose sight of the fact that we are not going to God for a purpose. Not even to heal somebody. Not even to heal somebody. We are going to God for the realization of God. When we have the realization of God, healing takes place. But that's not what we're going for. In His presence, there is fullness of life. Therefore, there's nothing to go to God for but for His presence. When you are there, you're in the presence of fullness of life. So there must be an absence of discord. There's a very wonderful passage in Science and Health. In the Gabriel of His presence, there are no contests. That's about as true a statement as you'll ever find anywhere in all of the metaphysical or spiritual world. In the Gabriel of His presence, there are no contests. Once you stand or sit or lie down in the conscious realization of God's presence, you will find no sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation to contend with. There isn't any. Therefore, the goal is attain the presence, and then you'll be in the fullness. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. It doesn't say that you have to get the Spirit of the Lord and then create liberty. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, liberty already is. You don't make it, you don't manufacture it, you don't treat for it. You attain the Spirit of the Lord and find liberty. You attain the fullness of His presence and you find freedom, health, harmony, wholeness, completeness. Never think of God as a means to some end. Never think of God as fulfilling some purpose. Never think of God except in the light of wanting God. In some class some years ago, I remember so distinctly saying that it is like having a mother that lives in China and wanting to visit her. And then someone says to you, well, why do you want to visit your mother in China? And then you want to knock them down. Why do they think? There's only one reason. You want to sit there with her. And that is our attitude toward God. There must be no reason. The only reason is to be with God. When you're there, that's enough. That's reason enough. If there's any need for any other reason, God will know it before you get there. Now, as an example, tonight, do you see why it is so important that we meet together often? Do you see why it is important that we have these reminders? Do you see why it is important that we unite in the Spirit and meditation, and that we have the benefit of those who have gone one step beyond ourselves? This is the reason. Because more has been accomplished here in this room tonight in one night than we could accomplish each by ourselves in a year. There isn't any question about that. I will find myself further along the path as a result of this night because it lifts me up too. We are a united consciousness. We're not one person. We are a united consciousness. And the degree of love of God in you finds a response in me, and the love of God in me finds a response in you. I'm as susceptible to feelings as you are. And so it is that when I feel a love of God, I feel it, and I'm lifted up by it. You are too, and you respond to it. Well, that's that for tonight, but I do understand we're going to have another evening on the 22nd of July. What? It's,